All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to True Crime with the Sarge. I'm your host, Joseph Jackalone, and with me, I have two exciting guests tonight. We're going to start off with Dana Pohl. She's a researcher and family advocate at Uncovered, where she leads the case research team. She is also the producer and host of the True Crime PI podcast, which is there's a link in the show notes, so make sure you check that out later on. Dana earned a Bachelor of Arts degrees in journalism and communications and a master's degree in library and information science from the University of Pittsburgh. Dana believes in collaborating with others to uncover case information, amplify victim stories, and provide answers to families who have been forced to carry the unbearable burden of not knowing. Dana, welcome to the show. I also have with us Andrea Cipriano. She is a cold case researcher at the digital content specialist at Uncovered, where she writes for the twice weekly true crime newsletter, The Citizen Detective. Once again, there's a link in the show notes. Andrea graduated with a Master of Arts in Forensic Psychology from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where she focused on researching and peeling back the criminal mind. As a cold case advocate, Andrea believes that it is never too late for justice, and neither do I. Ladies, welcome to the show. I'm glad you can make it. I'm excited about this. So, welcome.
Me too.
Thank you.
Okay, so we know that cold cases are very topical these days, specifically in the true crime community. We see a lot of good work. We also see some things that are questionable, but I think most of the time, some of the questionable things comes down to people like not knowing where to look. So, Dana, I want to start with you in regards to because in order to actually do this right, you really need to research these cases. Can you give us some tips and some advice kind of thing about how you would get started for somebody who's really never done this before?
Sure. So I can tell you what I do. My starting point is usually newspapers.com. So if I, find a case that I on the internet that I find interesting or a local case in my community, I will go out and start doing searches on newspapers.com. I also do just general Google searches, but kind of like to see like what can I find that I'm not finding on the internet. So can I go back and find something from when this actually happened? And so if it's a 20-year-old cold case, sometimes it's hard to find that article on the internet. We call it falling off the internet. So resources, clips, news clips, articles, they fall off the internet. You just can't find them anymore. And so starting with newspapers.com is a really good kind of jumping off point to then be able to move towards whatever you can gather off of just a plain Google search. I also like to look at Ancestry. I have access to ancestry.com. If you don't have access to Ancestry, you can always check out your local library. I'm a librarian. I will say check out your local library more times than you probably want to hear, but you can get free access to so many resources. So sometimes they're available online, and sometimes you actually have to go to the library to use those resources. But I like to look at the big picture of a case. So like, where was this person born? Who is their mother? Who is their father? I kind of like to expand out, and I can usually find information like that on Ancestry. So those are my two starting points. And then there's multiple places to look on the internet. So, of course, Uncovered database is one of them. The NamUs database, the Doe Network database for missing and unidentified people. And NamUs is also for missing and unidentified, as many of you probably know. There is no murdered database, so keep that in mind. Uncovered is the only murdered database, which is a really interesting thing. Sometimes I forget that, and I'll be like, oh, I'll just check NamUs when I'm looking at a murder. And I'm like, whoa, I can't do that. There's not going to be anything there. So just keep in mind that Uncovered is the only murdered database. So those are some of the resources. We also have other forums like Web Sleuths and Reddit. We obviously have Facebook pages that are run by families who often share a great deal of information. So those are some of the places besides looking, submitting FOIA requests and those asking for official documents from law enforcement.
Right. I mean, there's some great ideas. Like I said, I'll try to add some of those things to the show notes. I have uncovered.com in there. I loved uncovered.com. I spoke to uncovered for the cold case handbook, and then I also spoke to Andrea, which we're going to get to in a second, about those FOIL requests. But Andrea, before we get into those FOIL requests, I want to know about the Citizen Detective newsletter. Tell us exactly what we can glean from your work doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, part of being in the true crime space, I found that my Twitter feed was really overwhelming with a lot of like case updates, trial news, upcoming content to watch. And I know that even within the true crime space, there's a spectrum of people, right? There's the people who just want to consume content, there's people who want to go down the rabbit hole and do research. So the newsletter is really like the one-stop shop to get kind of all of your information about all of that stuff. So if you're looking for a content recommendation, we always include like a new documentary that's coming out, trial updates when there's like major things going on. We include that in there too. And every Tuesday we feature a new cold case. So really, it's just another tool to get information out there that's along the spectrum of consumption and also advocacy.
Right now, I know for not too long ago, you did an interview with Fox News about trying to help a family get the information out onto the web. Can you explain the process for somebody? So let's just say somebody said, listen, the case is 30 years old. It's my, aunt or my uncle, whatever, and there's nothing on the internet, because people don't realize this, right? 30 years
Yep.
ago, the internet really didn't exist, so, or it did. It was like, just chat rooms. So, and once it fell off the newspaper, that was it. It was gone forever. So we need to get this information back on. It's like almost going back and pulling this stuff up. So
Yeah.
I know you were helping this family. Just tell us what the process is, that what you as the cold case advocate and Uncover does for family members in that kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we kind of see like cold case advocacy work is very much this idea of pushing for continued investigations, and of course bringing attention and applying pressure to investigators to re-examine a case. Because like you said, when it's something is like 30 years old, a lot of the times it's in a filing cabinet and there's not a new detective looking at it. So even if you make enough noise on social media, sometimes you'll get a new detective assigned who's going to be really vocal about everything. But a big part of that is utilizing social media to spread awareness. It's definitely, this sounds like a broken record, but like get on every social media platform that you can. We are working with a family right now. They're the Pasella family. We just gave them the simple advice of, hey, start a Facebook page, just a Justice for Dawn Pasella Facebook page. And over the course of a few months, they have a couple hundred followers that are really, really active in that space. And that's emboldened them to have 2 rallies. They're hosting their second rally this upcoming November. So using social media as a mechanism to get this information out there is really one of the best ways to start, because it's just really accessible for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion. And like I've told family members too, like, just search for the high school or college reunion pages that they have
Yeah.
on Facebook.
Mhm.
So if you're looking for information and try to get to know who your victim is, no better than the kids that they grew up with. So
Mhm.
that's generally kind of thing. Dana, we're going to switch to you and get back to the research part of it. So when when somebody comes to Uncovered and they want to get this stuff out there, what part of the research thing do you help? I know the website is awesome. I love how Uncovered does it with the links and the timelines and everything
Mhm.
else. I mean, if people who really don't know anything about Uncovered, or talk about a research tool, like before you start doing your work, it might already be done for you. But just kind of walk us through that, Dana. Like how does this whole thing come together? Like how do you keep all that research in kind of not only perspective but in order, kind of thing?
So, great question. What we do is if someone brings us a case and it's a family member, they'll often have some documentation, some case files, some things that they have collected, newspaper articles, that sort of thing. And then we'll take that information and we will kind of do a giant search of the internet, get as much information as we possibly can, integrate it with what they had. We will write a narrative, and if we're lucky enough to be working with a family, we'll ask them to tell us about their loved one. The best way to tell a missing or murdered person's story is through the words of the people who knew them and loved them. And so we will talk to them about, what can you tell us? about this person? What do you want people to know? And so we'll include that in the narrative. And then we will build the timeline off of all the information that has been gathered or submitted by the family. And I think that this sets us apart in many ways. It makes us a very valuable resource because we have already constructed a timeline. We have a map that you can take a look at so you can see the locations. And I really think there aren't timelines unless, a newspaper article has created a timeline. You're not going to find a timeline out there. And so it takes a lot of work to put that together. I know Andrea did a case that had I think Don Pacella's case has 36 events. And Stephen Smith's case has multiple events. So so we take all of that, we put it into a timeline, we order it, put it into a timeline, and then we also connect the source so that how we know that this happened first and this happened second and this happened third. And so it takes a lot of time to research a case. It takes a lot of time to build a case file from beginning to end. But in the end, we create something that families can share with the media. They can share with other family members. They can share on their social media platforms. And it makes it easy for them to tell their loved one's story.
It's actually amazing. I did a talk down at the Mid Atlantic Cold Case Homicide Symposium down in Annapolis a couple of months ago, and I said, if you guys aren't going to uncovered.com when you're going through some of your cases, you're wasting time doing some of this on your own, because it's just it's amazing the amount of information that you can get just from this one website. Like I said, and I tell family members too all the time, go look there. If it's not there, we can get it on there, right? Just submit a form, right, Andrea? Just basically it's submit a form. Like, what kind of, if there's a family member like watching now, or somebody here is watching it and saying, even after the fact, and saying, I know this can help, what was some of the details that you're going to need to help start this whole process?
Yeah, it's a good mix for a bunch of different cases, but a lot of the primary information that we're looking for, of course, is a full name. We're looking for the city so that we can really narrow down the person. After, we have 50,000 unsolved cases in our database, we're definitely seeing duplicates of people's names. So getting some like location data, that's going to be really important so we know what case they're talking about. When a family member or even just any person sees a case and they want to submit it to us, we always ask that there's at least one source. So whether it's a news article, a podcast episode, or, like what Dana was saying before, if a family member has, an autopsy report or a police report, that works too. But just so that we know that this is like rooted in some reality. And then just some other information about like who the investigative agency is, specific dates that are relevant to the case. Really, it's just kind of, we see it almost as the bare minimum so that we can take that information and start looking just around the internet for more information.
Right. Now, when you get this and you start the process, it's like basically you're making a shell first, right? A shell of the case, and then you fill it in as you get more and more stuff. Is that how it works?
Yeah, we call it a case card. So we have a whole bunch of case cards on our site. And then the plan obviously is to go back in later and fill out a lot of the details. And one of the things I wanted to piggyback off of what Dana was saying about timelines, part of what makes the uncovered timelines really long is that we're not just looking at, event one, the individual went missing or they were murdered. We go back, especially, a couple of weeks, especially if it's really relevant. We like to think of it really as in the same way that the police do. They build out the entire timeline of how you got to the point of the incident. It's not just the incident itself. So that's really where a lot of the work comes from.
So Shannon from Connecticut actually has a pretty good question. We can actually stick this question right in here because we're actually talking about this. Do they ask for, does Uncovered use volunteers? Can you volunteer to help out in any of this process? So Dana, you can.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we do use volunteers. We do have a button on our website. So each case file has a contribute to a case button. So if there's a case card on our site and you see that this case isn't built out into a full case file with the timeline and the map, and you want to do some work on that, you can use the contribute to a case button to start contributing sources and information to that case that we can then take and add into the case card and then develop it into a complete case file. So that's one way. The other way is to join our community. And within the community, you can choose different projects that we have going on. So we'll put projects out to our community members. Our community is a fee-based community. People come in who are very interested in learning how to research, doing research, and also supporting one another while they do their, follow a case or research a case. And so you can choose a project or a portion of a project and start working on those cases. And usually what they are is it's like a case card, and we say, could you build out this case card? So could you take this name and turn it into just a little more of a beefier version of the case card, and then it'll go up onto the database.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Is this something that, let's say, somebody who runs a podcast that's pretty popular and they did a show or an episode on something and they say, hey, I know you have this case card and, I did an interview about this 6 months ago. It's not on the website. Can they submit that?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've worked with a bunch of different podcasters before. Some of them will even kind of give us a little bit of a tip that they have an episode coming out soon about a certain case so that we can prepare on our side, visualize the case file out, and then we typically have on all of our visualized cases, we have what we call our featured source. So it's the one that we typically say, like, this has the most robust overview of the case, or this is the one source that we reference the most often. So if a podcaster or a content creator comes to us and mentions like, hey, they're doing an episode on this case, we'll typically use their upcoming episode as the featured source. So kind of like just a good thing to work together for it. We want to collaborate 100%.
Like a news jacking kind of thing. And there isn't nothing wrong with that, right? So the algorithms love that stuff, right? They have a podcast, they got a website, and everybody's mentioning the same names. Then it shows up on social media. That's exactly what Google loves. Now, you said the magic word, which triggered my mind because right before the show, Dana and I were talking about collaboration. Mm-hmm. So, Dana, you tell me what your view is on this collaboration, because you had some great ideas. I always say when we talk before the show, we always talk about these great stuff, and then when it gets to the show, I get stupid and I forget these things. But that was the triggering word right there.
It triggered me as well. So yes, I have kind of adopted a little slogan, and it is, there is no I in cold case advocacy, meaning that I don't believe that the best way to work a cold case is in isolation alone. I believe that when you have a cold case, you need to be working with as many others as possible who may have expertise or have information that can help you move the case forward. So, for instance, the BTK task force is one new example of that, where people are being pulled together to collaborate, people with all different skills, experts in the field. And I think that this is a great role model for others. But you don't have to be an expert to collaborate. Mm-hmm. You can just be a citizen detective. We have many citizen detectives or community members at Uncovered who have collaborated and have gone off and worked on special projects or created organizations that are doing amazing work on cold cases. So we had two women from Alabama, one woman from Alabama met a woman from Oregon, and they started working together and created the Alabama Cold Case Advocacy. And it is amazing the work that they're doing. They are highlighting cold cases in Alabama. They are bringing them to the forefront. They've developed a podcast to talk about those cases. They reach out to experts. They work with people who understand, cellular data and cell phone data and all of that. So it's so important for all of us to work together. I don't believe that, sometimes we get so focused and we don't want to, we think we can solve this on our own, and whatever the reason is, whether it's I want to be the one who solves a cold case, or I, want the fame of doing this. I don't see that happening on a regular basis. I think more cases get solved when you reach out, you utilize the expertise of others, and you move cases forward.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, you want to add something to that, Andrea?
Yeah, I was just thinking back to when, I first started getting into true crime and realizing like, oh, like this is something that I really want to, a space I want to work in. I started a blog, and my whole point was like, I wanted it to be collaborative, because when I was going on like Web Sleuths and Reddit, I know on Web Sleuths you kind of have to like accrue some points to get your comments up there a little bit more. What I loved was the collaborative element of it, because you can get so stuck in your own theories if you think, well, a case must have happened this way. And then if you're not talking to other people, and exactly what you said, Dana, if you're not collaborating, I mean, you're just going to end up running yourself into the ground with one theory, and then that's not furthering the case. So yeah, just honestly, this is work that has to be done together.
And it's the advice that I give cold case investigators, and I wrote it in the book. And anytime I teach these classes about cold cases, I tell them, read the case file last, because the reason why this case is open is because there's a problem, and that problem could be human error. And once you invite human error in there, and if you follow that person and you read everything, you're going to go down the same path that they do. And that's just the way it goes, because you put those blinders on. And the same thing with what you guys do. I mean, you guys, you cannot do this and not come up with your own theories as you're putting this together, right? Your brain is like it is running, right? I mean, it's basically, and you just have to try to control that, because we know that can be detrimental to the whole overall thing. But yes, the group thing is the way to go. There was a question on here. It is, how old is the oldest case that you guys are featuring on Uncovered? Do you have a specific case?
I don't know, Dana. You might know an exact number. I don't know the one that's the oldest, but the one that comes to mind that's the oldest that we've done a lot of really hard work on is from 1960. Yeah, a lot of good time has passed. Like Dana said before, we spent a lot of really good time on newspapers.com. And even we found a local newspaper that has an archive, like their own archive database of all of their newspapers. So that was pretty much our primary source for an old case like that, because there was no new news about this. I mean, the last article about it was, it was in the 60s. So, yeah.
And that's what I try to tell people. Everybody wants to go and talk about the celebrated cases, right? Something's going on in Idaho, something's going on in Long Island, those are all great topics, but there are so many cases that are happening within your own local communities that fell off the radar 20, 30 years ago, that are absolutely great cases that need to be, brought back out into out of the attic, so to speak, or the closet, and dusted off. I mean, there's just so many different cases out there. It's amazing. Now, do you guys do just homicides, or I saw there's a couple of missing persons cases now? Are you starting to do a little bit more of that?
Yeah. So we do missing, we do unidentified. So we recently added unidentified cases to the database. We have suspicious deaths, and then we have murders. So that's the one unique thing, is that we have murdered people in our database. And that makes us super unique, because like I said, none of the other databases have murdered cases.
The Pasella case that I mentioned earlier is a suspicious death case. So, just branching out.
I just wish that the politicians would get on board with some of these things and take a look at what you guys are doing. And, we're starting to see, when I first spoke to Andrea about being a cold case advocate, now I start to see a degree, a certificate program, jump out there on that. Do you guys know anything about that kind of stuff?
I've seen victim advocacy programs, not tailored to cold cases, but that would be so interesting. I feel like that's a really good spot for where police departments could interface with citizens and kind of give them a role. Because, I mean, Joe, I know you said this at CrimeCon a bunch and it stuck with me. How badly can a citizen like munge up a case that's already 20, 30 years cold? So,
I think I used another metaphor, but that was pretty close.
Yes. I think like that's really where a good spot for someone who just has a basic background in some of this stuff. I mean, one of the great things about being a cold case advocate is you don't need to have like a specific degree. You don't need a doctorate in anything. It's really just, it's a level of common sense, ethics, just like general empathy, and then a desire to do it. I feel like that's the sauce.
Yeah, you hit another word that we'll go into. I want to talk before we end tonight is about the ethical issues and moral issues and that moral compass kind of thing in this. Unless you guys want to tackle this now, who Dana, do you want to tackle that, or about
Sure.
the ethics,
Yeah.
especially because you do the research, right? So the ethical part becomes really important to what you do. So I know we didn't have anything drafted for this, but let's put you on the spot. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, I mean, this is like a part of us. I feel like it's a part of Uncovered's mission has always been to be victim focused, to always think about how the words we're using when we're writing a narrative, and to, we're not into sensationalizing, we're not here for clicks. And so this is the big thing right now, right? Like there's almost a dividing line where you can see those who are in for clicks versus those who are really passionate and caring and tell these stories in a very ethical way. And so for me, it's super important to understand that these are real people. This person may have been a mom, a sister, or a brother, a father. They have families, they have people who love them. And so it is so important that when we speak about the case, when we share the case, when we research the case, we do it in a very ethical manner, very empathetic way. So just as an example, I just recently the first season of my podcast is a 7-part series on a doe. And she was found in Cobb County, Georgia in 1984. And she was unidentified for 36 years when I released the podcast. The whole reason why I did it was because I wanted to share her story. I wanted her to get her name back. And somehow I was somehow determined that that was going to happen. I was going to bring exposure. I was going to reach out to the ME's office. And I did do all of those things. And it was very, I tried to make her as human as possible. But recently, after time has passed, her genetic genealogy has been done on her. And a cousin reached out to me on my podcast page, and they said, "This you wrote the podcast about my cousin." And so all of a sudden now, so she's being identified. They have reached out to her and said, "Could you do confirmation DNA testing so we can, identify her?" And so this is all happening, but it shocked me almost because now I'm talking to a live person who is related to her. And it's very sad to learn her story. Before it was, I was making it up. I was saying she might have been a mom, a sister. I mean, I was being empathetic. I was being understanding. But now that I know her story, it's so much more like important that I did that I told that story the way I did, that I didn't expose things that shouldn't have been exposed, or, that I didn't kind of talk about her in an inhuman way. And because now there's a family attached to her. And it hasn't been announced yet. It isn't confirmed and released to the public, but it will be. And I would never want what I created to be out there if it wasn't done in an empathetic way, because now she's going to have a name and she's going to be connected to a family. So to me, it's so important, no matter if you're talking about an unidentified, a suspicious death, a murdered person, a missing person, to always remember that these are human beings. These are real stories. And, we are interested in them, and that's fine. That's how these cases get pushed forward or exposed or amplified. But at the same time, I'm always hoping that the interest is rooted in goodness and ethical behavior and advocacy.
Right now, Andrea, I want you to give us your thoughts on that too. But there was something you said when I interviewed you for the book and you said, Joe, it's about doing no more harm. And
Ugh.
it kind of stuck with me, right? Because as from the law enforcement perspective, right, you try to not to do more harm than that, but you're in a real tough spot, right? But when you're talking about now the civilian side, and you're talking about people like yourself and Dana who are doing this now for a living, but you're also doing it on your own kind of thing because this is your calling, right? This is like basically a calling. But
Yeah.
yeah, when you told me that, Andrea, it kind of stuck with me, and I kind of like now every time I talk about this, I always tell people, don't, no more harm, right? Just think of it that way. But let's expand a
Oh,
little bit on that.
yes. Oh my God. No, thank you for bringing that up. I think one of the things that sticks with me most about, this work is, I mean, exactly what you said, Dana, that there's a family grieving behind all of the victims that we see in the media. And I think oftentimes with high profile cases, these families, their grief is frozen because so much of the media attention is re-traumatizing with every single article that comes out with heartbreaking details. If it's not written in an ethical way, or that's, highlighting the humanity of the person, it's shoveling on more pain. And then, we see families can be exploited for their trauma. I remember the first time that I heard Sarah Turney was asked to cry in a documentary when they were filming about her missing sister, Alyssa. And I just think of like how awful that must have been for Sarah, who's already struggling with the entire situation, to then have somebody ask her to cry. It's causing more harm than good if it's not done correctly. So I think really that's where, reaching out to ethical content creators, working with people who are doing this for the right reasons, I think that's where families are going to find the most peace in this process, because you can get caught really easily in a sticky situation with someone who doesn't want to treat the case with the respect that it deserves.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I've gotten to a point now in my life as I'm much older than you guys, but and a lot less patience for nonsense. But when people ask me to do things, even if it's mainstream media, and they say, there's going to be a couple people on the panel, I ask, well, who's going to be on the panel? Because
Mm,
there are certain people, I won't name names, but there are certain people I will not go on television with them or anything. I just won't, because I don't believe what they say is accurate, and I don't want to be attached to that, and I'll end up saying something on live TV one day that I'll regret, and therein lies the problem. Like I said, I'm always one comment away from cancellation, so that's always that's a story of my life, but I've been that way my whole life. But it is what it is. But so Dana, so when we get this ball rolling, right? So we get this whole research. What would be, because not everybody's going to have access to all these computer programs and stuff like that, and people like myself, they're going to do pen and paper. What are some suggestions to keep this stuff organized? How would you go about telling them, say, listen, you don't have the computer, you don't have, because a lot of people don't even have internet access. So what would be some of the suggestions to kind of keep this research together? And what would you do?
So, I'm a pen and paper girl too, really. When I started doing this research, it was in 2005, and I started comparing missing and murdered I'm sorry, missing and unidentified people. So I would go into the NamUs database and I'd start, I'd look at a missing person, and then I try to look at, location of where an unidentified person was found. Was it close to where the missing person went missing? And I do all of this kind of, research to determine if I could find a match. Is it the same weight? Are they about the same weight, the same height? What color hair? Did they have a tattoo? All of that sort of thing. So I started doing all of that in 2005, and I was writing everything on little slips of paper and making, I had binders filled. So I'd like make a pocket in a binder and put all the little matches, and I printed out everything. And I still like that because I like it in front of me. Andrea is much more of she can flip around on the screens, and, I see her all the time, and she'll have multiple windows open, and I'm just like, I have it like printed in front of me. So we did develop for, let's say you want to do that type of research. I mean, you really have to, let me first say, you have to gravitate towards what works for you, and you have to kind of find a way. Like if you're a spreadsheet, kind of person, then creating a spreadsheet is probably your best bet. And if you, and you can customize that to be able to do, to contain information. It's very much like the Google sheet that we use at Uncovered that we share with our community when they're trying to visualize a case. So, it asks location, it asks name, date of birth, anything, all the pertinent information about someone, any sources you can gather, you can plug all of that into a spreadsheet. That's not my cup of tea. I'm much more either a docs person with multiple folders, or I will just do binders and paper folders. And so I think it's a challenge, but you really have to do it your own way. But one thing we did do at Uncovered is we created a making matches sheet. So if people are interested in comparing the missing with the unidentified, there's a ready-made form that shows you, asks you everything that you need to take from NamUs, fill in all of these things, and then you can make an easy comparison to multiple potential matches. So we did try to create a resource that would help people do that, because it's not easy. And sometimes I've seen people try to make a match and they're like, oh, it really looks like them, but the person didn't go missing until after this person was found, so it couldn't possibly be a match. But sometimes those things get lost in the shuffle. So anyway, it's just about finding your own organization and sticking to that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you basically create your own murder book. That's basically what you're doing, your own binder, stuff like that. Now, Andrea, I know you are definitely the more internet sophisticated one, because, oh my God, I used to, all hours of the day, I would reach out to Andrea and say, I have to do an Instagram story. How do I do this? I need to do this Facebook group. I don't know where to start, right? So I know you have the opposite of what Dana and I do, right? Because I'm a paper guy, notebook. My only suggestion is, before I get to you, Andrea, sorry, only suggestion, if you're going to use a notebook like I do for these cases, one notebook per case. Don't mix your cases together. No, that's a no-no.
No.
Sorry. So, Andrea, tell us about your electronic case files.
That's so funny. I will say, not in this apartment, in the apartment that my husband and I previously had, we went to Home Depot and bought the material that whiteboards are made of. It wasn't a whiteboard because it was, oh my God, that would have been too expensive. But we bought the material of a whiteboard and we had it up on our wall, because even though, yes, I am more digitally native, I'd rather do stuff online, I need to see it. I'm a very visual person. So having a lot of space was really important, which I think brings me into my digital comment. Behind my laptop here, I have a really big desktop, or a monitor, I should say, that I use for pretty much everything. I have way too many tabs open all the time. But in terms of how I stay organized, I mean, I will say the format that we've created for our own research at Uncovered, I will take that with me forever, because the way that we just organize the data, keep things, we call it, relational data. So people are connected to timeline events, which is connected to locations, which is connected to sources. The way that it all interweaves really is something that I feel like I can't get anywhere else. We use a custom thing in Airtable, which is a database platform. So yeah, I mean, but we do have a free version of it that we have. It's copyable for Google Sheets. And we can definitely get that out to anybody if they want to use that.
Okay, what's your favorite application, though? If you had to use something other than what the proprietary software that you guys are using, what's your go-to application?
Yeah, it would be definitely Google Sheets.
Google Sheets?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like Excel, so that has numbers in it. Yeah. So that I'm out. So
there's some magic that I did not do, someone else did for us, but we have it formatted so it doesn't feel really numbersy and a scary table. It's definitely again, I'm a visual person, so it works for me, I promise.
I think I found my next T-shirt. Right, I'm always one comment away from cancellation. So yeah, that's definitely a T-shirt coming, or a coffee mug. So I think are all the cold cases you put up recent cases like Charlotte Cena, or like I said, we have a case that you said 1960, right? But what's the I guess the time frame?
Yeah,
what's the most?
The cutoff that we have for case submissions is they need to be at least 3 years old. And the reason we do that is because we don't want to step on law enforcement toes, right? we want to allow them to run their investigative course before we say, hey, like we'll start using it and doing our own research and things like that. And plus, it also prevents some of the just some cases like Charlotte's. I mean, thank goodness we don't need to put hers on any database. So having that 3-year buffer we found has been the best for us. So it's actually interesting now. Dana and I were talking about this recently. We've hit a point where we're getting pandemic cases that we didn't have previously. So we're getting more up to date, but that 3-year gap stays.
Like I said, yeah, I mean, somebody wrote in here too. You would be constantly updating these things like every 5 minutes. But
Yeah.
this actually coincides with the federal law, with the Homicide Victims' Rights Act, right? Because it's 3 years for cases, and 1970 is the date that it starts with. So, Dana, how do you when you guys get all these information, all these cases in there? How are they all kind of just? Is it done alphabetically? Is it done? How do people research a case that they want to go to uncover?
So you can browse the database. So if you come to the database and you just want to check out cases, as soon as you hit the cold case page, you will see that there are cases. So you can start just browsing. You can scroll down and check out all the different cases. But we also have a search bar where you can type in the name of a person. You can filter by state. So we've added some new filters recently, which are exciting. But so you can filter by state. You can filter now by race. Help me out, Andrea. We can.
It's race, LGBTQ status,
Yeah.
whether or not a suspect has been identified.
Location.
Yeah, state for sure.
So
I think
state, yeah.
one. Oh, and then also manner of death. So either or not, I shouldn't say manner of death, but either suspicious death, missing person, murdered, or unidentified. You can filter for those. Another thing too, when you go onto the cases page, you'll see a big map right there. If you click on it to activate it, you can just start zooming in. Like, just go find your town. You'll find cases in the area. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, act national, think local, because they're there. There's a couple of good questions coming in here. So have you guys worked closely with law enforcement on a case? Well, how does that work? So,
yes.
Dana, you want to jump in?
Sure. So we have worked with the Paulding Sheriff's Office on the Nancy Eagleson case. I guess it was kind of like a team of people. So it was the sheriff, and then it was a journalist. We worked with a podcaster, and then also with the Porchlight Foundation. And so we were able to kind of digitize the case file for the sheriff's department. So that was the role we played there. We were able to connect with the Porchlight Foundation, and they agreed to pay for the exhumation of Nancy's body. So that was another piece of the puzzle. True Crime Garage covered the case for us on the podcast. And then we were able to work with Brian Duger, who is a journalist, and he did an amazing job. He was boots on the ground, investigating everything that he could get his hands on. He would come up with a name or some piece of information, and he'd shoot us a text and say, hey, start researching this. And so we literally are all behind our computers. Someone's looking in newspapers, someone's looking in another archive, someone's looking on Ancestry, and we are just spitting back information to him. And this was probably done over an 8-hour period in a single day. And what we were able to uncover was a ton of information that he initially used. It was shared with the sheriff. He initially did some reporting, and then more recently did some reporting. And we were part of the identification of a suspect.
Mhm.
So it was really an
Yeah.
interesting project.
Yeah.
When I used to do this for a living, I wish I had a Dana and Andrea there to help to call up and say I need help with the research. That's for sure. There's a bunch of Neanderthals I work with, and then be able to do this. But yeah, this is so. Let's talk about something that I always want to talk about. And Andrea, you helped me this with the book, the FOIL request or the FOIA request, right? The Freedom of Information stuff, super important. Give us the best tips, easiest way for people to do it,
Yeah.
specifically if a family member wants to do it, or how
Mhm.
uncovered or you can help out too. So let's just cover all that. And
Yeah, no, I love that. So yeah, I think just saying, a lot of the work that cold case advocates do involves publicly available information. So obviously, when you don't get the full picture there, that's where moving to like a FOIA or a FOIA request is going to get you a lot of that better access to other things, whether it's like an autopsy report or a list of collected evidence from a crime scene, even witness statements. You can FOIA for everything as long as you just get creative with it. So my first tip really is just get accustomed to your local police department's process. So I'm in New York City. The NYPD is actually really, really great about their process. They have an entire website for it. It's openrecords.nyc.gov if you guys are local. But all you have to do is just make a free account, and then they make it really easy for you to just click on whatever department you want to process a request with, and it's all digital. So that makes it a lot easier. If you're somewhere that doesn't have the NYPD, my big tip would be just again get comfortable with what your department does. But if you need more help with it, there's a website, and I know we mentioned it in Joe's book. It's the Student Press Law Center, so it's splc.org. They're a nonprofit that provides free legal assistance to student journalists. But on their website, they have a free public records letter generator. And it's super easy. They have fill in the blanks. So you just kind of tell it like what type of request you're trying to file, and it'll just give you like little spots to put in your own information. And they'll even figure out for you where you need to mail it, because I know that's something that's really confusing if you're somewhere smaller. So that's really kind of like, that's my go-to for other things. This sounds like a no-brainer, but just stay organized. FOIA requests can take weeks or even months to complete. So write stuff down in a notebook, not the same notebook you're using for your case, probably something different. But I will say just track like the request title, the date you filed it. You should get notified back for an acknowledgement date of when they have to get back to you. I put that on my calendar just so that I know that they're doing their stuff as well. But yeah, just, keeping organized is probably one of the best things. And then I would also say just get comfortable with rejection. I remember there are some cases I filed FOIAs for that are like 30 years old, and they'll still get back and say it's an open and active investigation, and they'll reject it. So you can fight the rejection and just give a bunch of reasons why. So that could be part of your letter back, but just get comfortable with knowing that the day you're supposed to be acknowledged, it's probably going to be a rejection, but just keep going.
yeah, never give up, anything like that.
Yeah.
Dana, do you have anything to add on to the FOIA request kind of thing? You want to add something onto that?
Yes. So I like working cases in Florida because the open records laws or public records laws are a little looser. And so you can access autopsy reports and that sort of thing if that's what you're needing. And there's a lot online. So they have you want to look at deeds, you want to look at marriage certificates. Everything's there. And from a research perspective, I like that because it just makes it easy. So you want to look at the state that you're trying to find the information in and kind of familiarize yourself with the laws. What can I ask for? What can't I? In Georgia, I was able to ask for the autopsy report and receive that autopsy report. No questions asked. Just yes, you have a right to that. And here it is, which my mouth dropped. I was so excited about that. But I also think that, yes, get used to rejection. But also think about the way you're asking for the information. So, you can't just say, I would like all documents on this case. You really have to get in there and be specific. Like, I would like all photos, notes, reports, summary reports, whatever anything that you can think of, you want to ask for. I know in Georgia that the first page of the incident report can be released, even if it is an open and active case. And so I read that before I sent my request, and that was all I got, but I did get it. So I think, that's really important. You have to kind of know the roles before you start.
Mhm.
Because if not, you're going to be disappointed, and it's going to take a lot longer to get the information.
Yeah.
Right. Shannon says this is amazing information. I've always been intimidated to file a FOIA, and everybody is, and that's why I always bring it up,
Mhm.
because it really isn't that daunting. But like Andrea and Dana just said, right, it can get frustrating. But
Yeah.
there's one other thing to this too, right? Like, it's just not the local police department. It could be a county police department. It could be the state police. It could be a
Mhm.
state lab. It could be private lab, medical examiner, coroner. There's so many things that you have to know, and that's why when we started the show off with Dana about the research, it's
Mhm.
really important to know who all the players are. So when you have to file these FOIA requests, you know who to send them to.
Yeah,
Mhm.
two things that reminded me of, and Shannon, thank you for sharing that. When I first started, I mean, of course, like exactly, I was also super intimidated. There's a professor out in Arizona. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he works with the NFOIC. They're the National Freedom of Information Coalition, and he does this thing where he calls it FOIA Fridays. So every Friday, when he's still sipping on his coffee, he will just like stay in practice. He'll just go file a FOIA request. And even if it's not for something that's, cold case related, it could be something, he said he started with what he knows best. So he FOIA'd for information like on his childhood home, and, stuff like that, just to get in the groove of it. And Dana, what you said actually reminded me of like, the whole thinking outside the box thing. There was a case out in Staten Island that I was, or still am, working on. And I was trying to get information about the suspect's coworkers. And I knew that they gave witness statements because they were mentioned in some of the articles. So I tried to foil for that and I got denied. So what I ended up doing was I actually went to the business authority and filed a request with the small business to get the names of the people who were working there. And I got it that way. So it's,
Mhm.
it feels like sometimes the only way to get the information is to go through the police department. But when you can get creative, whether it's through like the housing authority or the business authority, they might actually be more responsive.
Yeah, great point. Like I said, when there's usually an obstacle, people like to try to either climb over it, climb under it. I say just go around it sometimes.
Yeah.
Mhm. Exactly.
And that's why I tell
Mhm.
people, with states like Florida, and there's a couple other ones that have looser restrictions, specifically with the medical examiner.
Mhm.
They're not technically a law enforcement agency, right? So they're doctors and that kind
Mhm.
of thing. And then we'll give it to them, right? I mean, it's kind of like,
Mhm.
yeah, here it is, and
Yeah.
it's amazing what you can get from them. Like in New York City, all the autopsy reports, they take extra DNA samples, they take fingernail clippings, they do everything, and sometimes this stuff is just sitting somewhere, just waiting to be tested until someone drops a FOIA request. So I tell people all the time, you got nothing to lose. Just
Mhm.
do it, and like everything else, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. It's as simple as that. So you know, do it. I mean,
Yes.
this.
Just do it.
Just yeah. Well, the only thing we don't want to see, right, because it already happened, was somebody had made a FOIA request and got the crime scene photos, and then they were putting them
Oh,
online and
Oh.
stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, we talk about that moral compass, ethical thing. Just
Mhm.
be mindful that, you know, if you get, listen, crime scene photos, I don't think should be given out, but sometimes they make a mistake and these things slip through the
Mhm.
cracks. But just,
mhm.
don't do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And that
So
goes
as,
back to,
I'm sorry, Adrian.
no, I was just thinking too, like that goes back to the whole ethics conversation of even, our own moral compass of when we're looking at cases so often, of course, your own curiosity creeps in and you want to understand it better. But is it for the betterment of the case, or is it because you're interested? It's the
Mhm.
moral checking.
And I mean, I think you have to check yourself and say, would I want this information about my loved one in the hands of someone else? So,
Yeah.
if or would I want that to be made public? So, whatever you have in front of you, you should assess it through that lens, I think, before you start sharing it.
Right. And, one of the things that we talked about, a lot of things, and a lot of people saying, oh my God, I got to go back and take notes on here. You can always, ask me, ask Andrea, and ask Dana. We got their Twitter. I know people saying they're already following you. One thing you'll learn about J-Bo Nation is that great group of people. They really, enjoy this stuff, especially when you have, guests like yourselves. And then somebody had made a thing about, having positive ladies, as representing and stuff like that. It was actually a good thing. So I actually didn't even realize that until she said it, because I've known Andrea for a long time, and I just met Dana. She introduced me at CrimeCon, right? But something that you had said before about the was it the True Crime Garage, the podcast, right? So it's another CrimeCon alumni, right? So I mean, here we're starting to see CrimeCon becoming like this. Area where a lot of people are coming together and want to do great things. So I really like that kind of thing. And, we had a blast, even though I was tired. I think I was the first one to leave.
I know. I was jealous. Don't get me wrong. It's, I'm an introvert at heart. So all of the like extra socializing and everything and meeting people is like, I have to push myself to do that. But I mean, like you said, it's one of those things where the people and the quality of people who are going is amazing. I think we've definitely created lifelong friendships with a lot of the people that we've met at CrimeCon. I mean, it was, I'm excited for Nashville.
It's a great networking event, right? So you get to meet people like yourself who are doing really like the behind the scenes thing, right? That's why I wanted to have you guys on here, because there are a lot of people that don't know about Uncover. There are a lot of people that don't know about advocates and what you guys actually do. All right. So as we're winding this down, we're going to give you guys the last words. You can tell us a little bit more about what you do. So Dana, we'll start with you. Tell us about your podcast and where it's headed, or is there what season you're on, where it's going.
So when I started working full time for Uncovered, I put my podcast on hold. So I do have 2 seasons. The first season is the 7-part series on the Cobb County Jane Doe. That has resulted in, like I said, Othram Labs is working on identifying her. That should happen hopefully by the end of this year. So she'll have her name back, and that is just, music to my ears. And then the other piece of that is I connected with a really cool retired Cobb County homicide and cold case detective and interviewed him for the podcast. And I had a theory, and I asked him, I said, do you think that this Joe could be a victim of Samuel Little? And he said the most potential suspect in this case is Samuel Little, which then extended the series. It extended my single episode into a 7-part series. So what ended up happening at the end was I reached out to a woman who I knew was working on the task force in Georgia that was matching Samuel Little confessions to Georgia homicides. And they reopened the case. So they wanted to take a look at this Cobb County Jane Doe and see if she could be a potential victim of Samuel Little. That got stalled along the way. So I'm not 100% sure where it sits, although she assures me it's still being reviewed. But in the end, just knowing who she is was really what I was trying to do. Season 2 is missing. I did a series on Lonnie Ray Rogers, and I covered some other missing people. I interviewed John Bischoff from NCMEC. He is the vice president of the missing persons division. And so I also interviewed David Middleman from Othram for season 1. So right now, that's what I have available, hoping to go back and pick up a 3rd season along the way.
That's great. Andrea, before we get to your final things, I just want to bring some. Does Uncovered do like the GoFundMe kind of thing, where they're helping fund some of these cases through that kind of thing?
Yeah. So yeah.
So they take donations.
Oh, Dana, sorry, I thought you were going to speak.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, we definitely do. A lot of it though is when we're working with either family members and they have GoFundMes, we'll push them to that more often. So not so much for the work that we do personally, but definitely if it's something related to a case, we'll definitely push that out there. Yeah.
Cool. All right, now Andrea, tell us. We know you're doing the journalism bit with the Citizen Detective. Tell us what other kind of interests or what other future plans that you have in regards to just about anything. It doesn't have to do with
Yeah.
cold cases, but
No, definitely. I think a lot of cool stuff in development. So I would just
well,
say
we don't want to give away secrets. Yeah, we don't want to give away secrets.
but I will say, just some of that other stuff aside, just again mentioning the Dawn Pasella case that we've been working really closely with the family. So to plug anything, I'd plug the Justice for Dawn Pasella. It's Pasela is how you spell her last name. If you would go give a like to her Facebook page. Like I said, there's a lot of really good movement on that. A couple upcoming court dates and things that are happening. So her case is developing really quickly. So if you guys want to follow that process, that would be awesome.
That'd be great. Okay, ladies. Dana Pohl, Andrea Cipriano of Uncovered.com, two cold case advocates and experts on these topics. They're there on Twitter. All their information is on the show notes. Give them a follow. You have a question. I know a couple people asked for that website for the FOIA request. We can give you all that. You can always ask me too, and we'll do this. And I'd love to do this again in the future, especially if we got some other case developments. I think it's actually pretty cool, and I think we need to get the word out there for people about like yourselves who are doing really good work. I appreciate you guys coming on. I appreciate everybody that came into the show tonight. A lot of people, a lot of contacts, a lot of comments, excuse me. So it was great to see everything. And you guys, everyone, have a great day and hang in there. We'll talk to you soon. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.